In 1997, Apple had 90 days of cash left. The company that would one day be worth $3 trillion was weeks away from shutting down forever. Most people think Apple's story is about great products, about sleek design and brilliant engineering. That is the story Apple wants you to believe. The real story is far more calculated, far more deliberate, and far more instructive than anything you will ever read in a business school textbook. Today on Wealth Map, we are mapping exactly how Apple became the first company in human history to reach a $3 trillion valuation. Not the version they teach in classrooms, the version that actually happened. Consider this. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was not failing because its products were bad. It was failing because it had forgotten what business it was actually in. Apple had spent a decade trying to compete with Microsoft on Microsoft's terms, selling computers to corporations, chasing market share, licensing software. It was a war Apple could never win. Microsoft owned the enterprise. Apple was fighting in the wrong arena entirely. Jobs understood something most CEOs never grasp. You do not compete with a giant by becoming a smaller version of the same giant. You find an entirely different battlefield. His first move was not to launch a new product. It was to cut. He reduced Apple's product line from 350 items to 10. He eliminated everything that was not exceptional. He forced the company to become ruthlessly focused on doing fewer things better than anyone else on the planet. But focus alone does not build a $3 trillion empire. What Jobs did next is the part most business analysts still underestimate. In 2001, Apple launched the iPod and iTunes. On the surface, this looked like a music player, a nice device. An interesting side project for a computer company finding its feet. It was not a side project. It was a Trojan horse. Jobs understood that before you can sell someone a premium product, you first need to make them emotionally dependent on your ecosystem. The iPod put Apple in people's pockets years before the smartphone existed. iTunes put Apple software on hundreds of millions of Windows computers, the competitor's own platform, and quietly made the world comfortable with Apple's interface, Apple's store, and Apple's way of doing things. By the time the iPhone launched in 2007, Apple already had a global audience that trusted it, understood it, and was ready for it. Nokia had 40% of the global mobile market that year. Their executives openly laughed at the iPhone. No physical keyboard, poor battery life, a basic camera. Technically, Nokia was correct on every point, but Nokia was measuring the wrong things entirely. Because what Jobs launched in 2007 was not a phone, it was a platform. And the difference between those two words is worth approximately $3 trillion. Here is what most people still miss about the iPhone. When Apple launched the App Store in 2008, it made a decision that looked generous on the surface. It invited outside developers to build applications for its platform. Hundreds of thousands of developers poured their time, their money, and their creativity into building products that ran exclusively on Apple hardware. Apple did not pay them to do this. The developers paid Apple. Every application sold through the App Store gave Apple a 30% commission. Every subscription, every in-app purchase. Apple had quietly built a toll road, and the entire digital economy was driving on it. By 2020, the App Store alone was generating more annual revenue than McDonald's entire global operation. This is the moment Apple's business fundamentally changed, and the majority of people on the planet still have not noticed. Apple is no longer a hardware company. This is perhaps the most important and most overlooked financial fact about the world's most valuable business. In 2023, Apple's services division, the App Store, Apple Music, iCloud, Apple Pay, Apple TV generated over $85 billion in revenue. That is more than Nike's entire global business. Services carry profit margins of nearly 70%. iPhones carry margins of around 35%. When Wall Street values Apple today, it is not valuing a phone manufacturer. It is valuing a subscription business with the most loyal customer base in corporate history. The average iPhone user replaces their device every 3 to 4 years. But they pay Apple every single month for storage, for music, for television, for financial transactions. The hardware is no longer the product. The hardware is the entry point into a financial ecosystem that never stops collecting. Jobs conceived this. Cook perfected it. But there is one final layer. The move that took Apple from simply valuable to historically unprecedented. Between 2013 and 2023, Apple spent over $600 billion buying back its own stock. $600 billion. To place that in context, that figure is larger than the entire GDP of Sweden. A stock buyback reduces the number of shares in circulation. Fewer shares means each remaining share represents a larger piece of the company. It is not magic, it is mathematics. And Apple executed it at a scale no corporation had ever attempted in human history. Warren Buffett, whose company Berkshire Hathaway owns approximately 6% of Apple, has called it one of the most intelligent capital allocation strategies he has ever witnessed in his 6 decades of investing. Apple did not reach $3 trillion purely by making products people loved. It reached $3 trillion by making products people loved, locking them into an ecosystem they could not leave, building a services empire on top of that ecosystem, and then systematically engineering the value of every remaining share upward year after year. That is not a technology story. That is one of the greatest financial strategies ever executed by any organization in the history of capitalism. The lesson Apple teaches is not that design matters. Everyone already knows that. The lesson is that the most valuable companies in the world are almost never in the business you think they are in. Apple is not a phone company. Amazon is not a retailer. Google is not a search engine. The companies that change the world use one visible product to build an invisible empire. Apple simply did it better than anyone who has ever tried. This is Wealth Map, where we map the wealth, the empires, and the systems that shape the world most people never see clearly. If this video gave you something most people will never know, subscribe. Because the next map we draw goes even deeper.